Under pressure, German authorities admit the lorry attack suspect should have been deported. As the manhunt is stepped up for the Tunisian asylum seeker, it's emerged he was known to police well before the terror attack that killed 12 and plunged Germany into mourning.
Also tonight, health fears as the Queen and Duke of Edinburgh delay their Christmas trip to Sandringham.
Denied bail, the Marine challenging his conviction for murdering a Taliban fighter.
And the baby gorilla hand-reared by humans, but now ready for a proper family Christmas.
This is the ITV Evening News with Mary Nightingale and Mark Austin.
Good evening. There are serious questions for German authorities tonight about why the man thought to have carried out Monday's deadly truck attack in Berlin was not stopped. It emerged today that the main suspect, a Tunisian asylum seeker, had been watched by security services and had been arrested by police as recently as August.
The residence permit of 24-year-old Anis Amri was found inside the cab of the truck used to kill 12 people and injure dozens more. He lived in Berlin and authorities say he'd been in contact with Islamists just before the attack. Our security editor Rohit Kachru on the hunt for Europe's most wanted man.
His name is Anis Amri, though he uses 6 different aliases. He's Tunisian, but with fake documents claims 3 nationalities. He sounds mysterious, but he's well known to German authorities as a suspected criminal. Today, a state minister said the suspect was well known to them for links to Islamist extremism.
Die Sicherheitsbehörden haben ihre Erkenntnis und ihre Information zu dieser Person.
The security agencies exchanged information about this person in the counter-terrorism centre in November, he said. The local state officials for criminal investigations eventually initiated proceedings with federal prosecutors because of suspicion of preparation for a criminal offence endangering national security. He was identified not through advanced investigation, but from a discarded document left in the cab of a lorry. A day after it was removed, the crime scene cleared. Only now are his details being circulated. Anis Amri was born in 1992 in Tunisia, but left 7 years ago. He arrived in Germany in July last year and moved to Berlin in February. His application for asylum was rejected 6 months ago because authorities in his home country denied he was a Tunisian citizen. He was awaiting replacement ID papers, which German officials confirmed had arrived today. The German foreign minister laid a single rose, but his government cannot explain why the attacker wasn't stopped.
Can you reflect on the mood in Berlin?
Sorry. He's given a statement.
Would you like to say anything about the investigation? It seems that a suspect being identified 3 days on is...
I think he has given a statement and that's fine.
But his views on the investigation?
What this? I mean, as I said, the minister has given a statement. You've been there, so that's fine.
The suspect was known to have links to the man thought to be featured in this video. A 32-year-old Iraqi who was arrested last month and is described as Germany's IS leader. The agony is compounded by the questions. Could what happened here have been prevented? And will it ever be explained? Rohit Kachru, ITV News, Berlin.
Well, the names of some of those thought to have been killed in Monday's attack are beginning to emerge. Among them is a 31-year-old Italian woman who had lived in the city for 3 years and an Israeli woman in her 60s who was at the market with her husband, who himself was badly injured. From Berlin, Sally Lockwood reports.
Berlin's agony is clear. In a week that should be full of festivities, the city's residents are laying flowers in memory of victims they didn't know, knowing it could quite easily have been them. The first victim has been named as 31-year-old Fabrizia Di Lorenzo from Italy, whose father says he has given up hope of finding her alive after her mobile phone was found at the scene. And Dalia Eliakim from Israel has been missing since the attack. Her husband Rami remains in hospital in Berlin in a serious condition. The hospital treating the most critical patients told me some are still fighting for their lives.
To our hospital there have been 13 admissions, 8 of them very serious, 2 of them died. And now we have in this hospital still 4 patients. They need additional surgery and care.
Knowing the person responsible for this is still on the run has left people here on edge.
I'm very worried, sure, because the attacker is still anywhere. We don't know, and so I'm very frightened.
Very, very bad. I understand. I can't understand this terrible crime.
With German police still working to identify the victims, there are families tonight in unimaginable pain.
While the investigation has received criticism for its lack of progress, the clear-up at the scene of the attack here has happened relatively quickly. This road reopened just in the last few moments, and Christmas lights have come back on in the market this evening ahead of its reopening tomorrow. But with candles and flowers now lying in spots all around the market, it will have a very different feel when it does.
All right, Sally, thank you very much indeed.
OK, so let's go back now to our security editor, Rohit Katru in Berlin. And German authorities there, Rohit, have some pretty serious questions to answer, don't they?
And more questions tonight, because it's now emerging that this suspect had been under covert surveillance for several months. We already knew that he'd been arrested already 3 times this year. The authorities here hoping for a 4th. They describe him as only being a suspect because they are wounded by the fact that they initially arrested the wrong man. And so they're now proceeding with both urgency and caution. 1 step forward today, but only after several steps back for investigators yesterday.
Rohit Katru in Berlin, thank you.
Well, here security has been stepped up outside Buckingham Palace following the events in Berlin. A police cordon will now be put in place during the daily changing of the guard ceremony. It attracts thousands of tourists and remains one of London's most popular attractions.
Queen and Prince Philip are still in Buckingham Palace tonight after officials said heavy colds have forced them to delay their annual Christmas trip to Sandringham. They had been due to make the train journey to Norfolk this morning.
It follows yesterday's announcement that the Queen is stepping down from more than 25 organisations because of her advancing years. Here's our royal editor, Tim Hewitt.
This should have been today's picture of the Queen, her annual arrival at King's Lynn Station on the way to Sandringham. But she never appeared, and palace officials confirmed that both she and Prince Philip are unwell. The Prince of Wales, on a visit to Scotland today, was not discussing his parents' health, although there was perhaps a sign that a cold is going round in the family. And there was no sign of any problems as the Queen carried out engagements as normal earlier this month. Palace officials have often talked about how well she is. And Prince Philip, now 95, is known to maintain an energetic lifestyle. Doctors say that infections are more worrying for people in their 90s, but physical fitness makes an important difference.
I think I would be slightly more concerned with an elderly person presenting with a very heavy or cold flu symptom because they're more susceptible to developing complications afterwards. But if in general they're fit and well, it shouldn't be much more of a problem.
It was announced yesterday that the Queen is relinquishing 25 of the patronages she holds, but her health has rarely been a concern. This was her response earlier this year when Northern Ireland's Deputy First Minister Martin McGuinness asked if she was well.
Thank you very much. I'm still alive.
There is for now no reason to suppose that it won't be the normal family Christmas at Sandringham.
And Tim is at Buckingham Palace tonight. And Tim, you know, these health scares always worrying. How concerned should we be, though?
Well, the guidance that I was getting a lot earlier in the day is that there was really no cause for serious concern. But officially, palace spokesmen here are not adding to the very short early statement that they made that both the Queen and Prince Philip have postponed their trip to Sandringham, suffering from heavy colds. What we do know is that the Royal Standard still flies above Buckingham Palace tonight. That means that the Queen and Prince Philip are still here, both still nursing those heavy colds. What we also know is that the Queen would much prefer not to be at Buckingham Palace, and that as soon as possible she will be making her way to Sandringham. But when that's going to happen, I just don't know.
Well, very soon, hopefully. Tim, thank you very much indeed.
At least 31 people have been killed and dozens more badly burned after an explosion at a fireworks market in Mexico. Around 2,000 people were at the site in San Pablito. The cause of the explosion is still unclear.
And a Syrian girl whose tweets from inside Aleppo highlighted the horror of that city's siege has met Turkey's President Erdogan at his palace in Ankara. Bana Alabed and her family were evacuated from the city along with tens of thousands of other people this week.
Here, a Royal Marine convicted of murdering a wounded Taliban soldier will not be freed for Christmas, judges rule today. Sergeant Alexander Blackman was hoping he'd be granted bail ahead of an appeal against his conviction next year. But he was disappointed, along with his wife and many supporters who'd turned up in court, as Paul Davis reports.
Campaigners believed this would be a key day in their battle to overturn Sergeant Alexander Blackman's conviction for murder. His fellow Royal Marines were outside the High Court to see it. His wife Claire, still hopeful that her husband was about to be freed on bail to spend Christmas at home, was cheered as she arrived. Sergeant Blackman, who was known as Marine A during his court-martial, has served 3 years of a life sentence for murdering a dying prisoner in Afghanistan. His conversation with other Royal Marines after shooting the man was recorded on their head cameras.
I'll shock you off this motor call you. Nothing you would do to us.
Earlier this month, Alexander Blackman was given leave to appeal following new evidence suggesting his mental state after an exhausting tour affected his actions. But supporters who hoped he'd be free today were disappointed.
From a courtroom packed with past and present members of the military, there were cries of shame and you must be joking as the application for bail was turned down. These supporters will take some consolation from the fact that Sergeant Blackman's appeal to reduce his conviction from murder to manslaughter will be heard as early as late January, and that 70% of cases selected for that process are successful.
Claire Blackman was remaining positive.
We must remember that earlier this month, the Criminal Cases Review Commission decided to refer the case back to the appeal courts. And this is the most important step towards getting Al's conviction and sentence overturned.
The wife and campaigner hopes this, her fourth Christmas without her husband, will be the last. Paul Davis, ITV News.
Right, still to come on the ITV Evening News. New problems for Jeremy Corbyn as a Labour MP in a marginal seat resigns.
And an animal family for the baby gorilla who'd been hand-reared from birth. Those stories and more after the break. Join us then.
Welcome back. A millionaire property developer is starting a minimum 25-year jail sentence tonight after murdering his young escort girlfriend. Peter Morgan strangled Georgina Simmons at a home near Newport after hearing she planned to blackmail and then leave him. He initially told police he knew nothing about her disappearance, but later admitted that he had killed her, as our Wales correspondent Rupert Evelyn reports.
Well, I had the intention to kill her, didn't I? But I don't know.
The matter-of-fact confession of killer Peter Morgan, a millionaire who chose to end the life of his escort girlfriend rather than let her reveal details of their sordid relationship to his wife and children. Georgina Simmons was paid up to £10,000 a month for an exclusive relationship with Morgan. In the grounds of his castle near Newport, she lived rent-free in a bungalow, all part of the contract between her and the businessman. Simmons wanted to end the relationship, but she didn't want to lose her lifestyle. she chose to blackmail Peter Morgan. It was a decision that would end her life. Carefully planned and calmly executed, the day before she died, Morgan went to fetch his tools for killing. Having strangled the woman he claimed to love, he then denied any knowledge of her disappearance.
Where do we think she was going at 12 o'clock?
Didn't say. She didn't say. She just wanted me gone by 12.
But he knew where she was and why she wasn't coming back. 7 years ago, Peter Morgan, a man worth £20 million, was speaking to ITV News about his pride in restoring an ancient windmill.
Here and built the windmill and built the farm.
Now a convicted murderer who tried to use his mild Asperger's syndrome as a defence, his wealth will serve little benefit inside a prison cell. In a statement today, Georgina's mother said her death has left a hole in our lives that will never be repaired, adding that her granddaughter has been left to grow up without a mum in what has been a devastating tragedy for the whole family. Rupert Evelyn, ITV News, Newport.
A Royal Marine reservist has been jailed for 14.5 years for selling ammunition and grenades to an undercover police officer. Martin Shannon stole guns, ammunition and explosives from his naval base in Poole and buried them in the New Forest over 4 years to sell on the black market.
Drone users might soon have to register their equipment and take a mandatory safety test under new measures to prevent collisions with passenger jets. Ministers are also proposing tracking devices and imposing hefty fines for anyone caught breaking the law.
And hundreds of people have gathered at Stonehenge to watch the sunrise on this, the shortest day of the year. Daylight on today's winter solstice lasted just 7 hours, 49 minutes and 41 seconds.
Now, staff at one of Britain's biggest abortion providers were poorly trained, lacked knowledge and put women at risk. That's the damning verdict of the health watchdog after it visited 12 Marie Stopes clinics in England earlier this year. It led to some services being suspended, but the organisation insists it's now made considerable improvements. Rebecca Barry reports on the serious failings.
They promise the women in their care they'll always be treated with dignity and respect. But in a damning report, the health watchdog says Marie Stopes International, one of Britain's biggest abortion providers, put women at risk with a catalogue of failings at its clinics.
I was scarred mentally, I was scarred physically.
When Laura had an abortion at a Marie Stopes clinic, she felt she wasn't given adequate advice or support.
It felt like a conveyor belt experience. I went in very afraid. I just remember so vividly a lady, one of the nurses, escorting me down after I'd gone through the procedure, and her words were, "You silly girl, do you not know what you've done?"
In August, Marie Stopes International suspended all terminations involving general anaesthetic and for under 18s after the Care Quality Commission raised safety fears. In a series of inspections, the watchdog found staff had limited training in resuscitation. Clinicians were found to be bulk signing forms authorising abortions. And in one case, doctors failed to explain the procedure to a woman with learning difficulties. Marie Stopes says, since the inspections, we've made considerable changes to our management, governance and assurance processes, including extensive training of staff and updating of policies. We have learned from this and intend to continue our focus on providing the safe and compassionate care that women expect and deserve. Laura just hopes no other woman goes through what she did.
After I went through the process, there was just no care. It was just in and out. I was not informed. It was just not an informed decision.
The watchdog says improvements have now been made, but if necessary, it won't hesitate to take action again. Rebecca Barry, ITV News.
A fierce critic of Jeremy Corbyn's leadership is to stand down as a Labour MP, triggering a tight three-way battle for his seat. Jamie Reid, who's represented Copeland in Cumbria since 2005, is leaving to take up a job in the nuclear industry. But the fallout could be huge for his party. Our political correspondent Carl Dinnan is in Westminster. And Carl, this by-election is going to be a real test, isn't it?
Yeah, it really could be. It could be very difficult indeed for Labour to hold on to this seat, which might have been in Jamie Reid's mind, in the back of his mind, when he made this decision to quit, although he says the real reason is because he's got this offer of a good job in the nuclear industry and, crucially, most importantly, it's near his young family, much closer, of course, than this place. In his resignation letter to Jeremy Corbyn, he was actually very gentle. The letter says that we desperately need a Labour government so that communities like mine can build the future they deserve. I wish you every success in your endeavours to become our next Labour Prime Minister. Now that sounded a little bit surprising to some folks around here because Jamie Reid, as you say, has been a fierce critic of Jeremy Corbyn's over the years, and his normal tone has been a bit more like this.
It's absolutely clear that the Parliamentary Labour Party, over 80% of them, have no confidence in his leadership going forward, have no confidence in his ability to win a general election. Please, for the sake of our party, leave now. You cannot steer a ship without a crew.
So there you go. But the real significance of all this is that by-election coming up. Labour won the seat at the general election with a majority of just 2,500 from the Conservatives, and UKIP made a good showing. Since then, at the referendum, that seat, Copeland, voted quite convincingly for Brexit, which would suggest that Labour maybe aren't entirely in step with their electorate there. So it will be a difficult one for them. And more broadly, some are wondering if other MPs will not also decide to quit. But in the meantime, it's a Christmas present Jeremy Corbyn could well do without.
All right, Carl Dinner in Westminster, thank you.
And finally tonight, the family of primates who have a baby gorilla in their midst just in time for Christmas. 10-month-old Afia, I hope that's how you pronounce it, has been hand-reared by keepers at Bristol Zoo after she was born by emergency caesarean operation.
Yeah, she needed round-the-clock care, but as she's got stronger, Afia has been gradually introduced back into the pack. And now she is there full-time, as Olivia Kinsley reports.
Clinging to her foster mother Ramina's arm, Afia is still unsure of the world and the other gorillas around her. Until a few weeks ago, she had only had contact with her human keepers. Now she is doted over by Ramina, her birth mother Kira watching on. Afia was born by an emergency caesarean 10 months ago. As mum Kira's life hung in the balance, keeper Lindsay raised Afia as her own.
It's actually quite like having a baby at home, and in a chance that you can transfer things like human formula milk are good for apes and gorillas. We did use nappies when we were out of the zoo enclosure, but also you don't want a gorilla to be hand-reared thinking it's a human. You want to make sure it knows how to be a gorilla, and to do that we knew we had to get it back with the family as soon as possible.
Introducing a baby gorilla to the troop can take 3 to 4 years. Remarkably, Afia's bonded in just a few weeks. That's meant a sudden parting from her human parent, Lindsay, but she knows it's the right thing.
If you go into hand rearing treating it as your baby, then you're not doing the right job and it's not the job for you. So you have to have that mindset of treating it like a gorilla and not like a human baby.
If you love her, you let her go.
Exactly, absolutely.
At just 10 months old, Afia is already gifted at building friendships. This one looks like it will last a lifetime. Olivia Kinsley, ITV News, Bristol.
All's well that ends well.
Very sweet. Right, that's it. Tom Bradley's here with news at 10.
But from all the evening news team, have a very good night. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.